I've summed up my 5 takeaways and thoughts about this book in this video. I highly recommend you to read the original book of the author. Please share with me your opinion about this book in the comments below. The Bonds of Inequality, by Destin Jenkins, is a comprehensive and engaging book that examines the origins and perpetuation of economic inequality in the United States. Jenkins argues that inequality is not solely a result of individual merit or lack thereof, but is rather a product of systemic and structural factors, such as historical exclusion of marginalized groups from wealth-generating opportunities. He takes a historical approach to the issue, tracing the evolution of capitalism in the United States and its impact on different social groups. Jenkins argues that capitalism and the financial industry have played a significant role in perpetuating inequality by privileging certain groups of people and exploiting the labor of others. He explores how government policies and regulations have been shaped by the interests of the financial industry and have contributed to the concentration of wealth among a small number of individuals and corporations. The book also analyzes the New Deal era as a critical moment in U.S. history that represented a shift towards a more social democratic system. However, the progress was limited by racism and other forms of exclusion. Jenkins shows how the New Deal failed to fully address the needs of African Americans and other marginalized groups. Jenkins also examines the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, which played an essential role in advancing racial equality, but did not fundamentally alter the economic structures that underlie inequality. He shows how the movement's focus on political and legal rights did not fully address economic disparities, which continue to persist today. Finally, Jenkins argues that to address inequality in the United States, we must look beyond individual solutions, such as education or job training, and instead pursue more structural reforms that address the root causes of inequality, including systemic racism and economic exploitation. The book is a powerful call to action for policymakers and citizens alike to take bold action to create a more equitable society. Overall, The Bonds of Inequality is a must-read for anyone interested in understanding the history and ongoing challenges of economic inequality in the United States. The first main point of The Bonds of Inequality is that inequality is not solely a result of individual merit or lack thereof, but rather a product of systemic and structural factors. In other words, economic and social inequality cannot be attributed solely to personal choices or individual behavior, but is deeply rooted in the historical exclusion of marginalized groups from wealth-generating opportunities. Jenkins argues that historical events such as slavery, Jim Crow laws, and discriminatory housing policies have created and perpetuated economic inequality. These policies have systematically excluded certain groups of people, particularly Black Americans, from access to wealth-generating opportunities like education, jobs, and housing. As a result, inequality has become entrenched in the economic and social structures of the United States. Jenkins also points out that contemporary factors, such as the rise of neoliberalism and financialization, have further contributed to the concentration of wealth among a small number of individuals and corporations. These factors have reinforced systemic inequalities by privileging certain groups of people, such as the wealthy and white, while exploiting the labor of others, particularly people of color and low-income workers. Overall, Jenkins argues that addressing inequality requires a systemic approach that addresses the root causes of inequality, rather than simply focusing on individual choices or behaviors. By understanding and addressing the structural factors that create and perpetuate inequality, we can begin to create a more equitable society. The second main point of The Bonds of Inequality is that capitalism and the financial industry have played a significant role in perpetuating economic inequality in the United States. Jenkins argues that the financial sector has become increasingly dominant in the U.S. economy, and that this has led to a concentration of wealth and power among a small number of individuals and corporations. Jenkins shows how government policies and regulations have been shaped by the interests of the financial industry, rather than the needs of the broader population. This has led to a system in which the financial sector is able to extract enormous profits from the economy, while ordinary workers struggle to make ends meet. Moreover, Jenkins argues that capitalism inherently creates inequality, as it is based on the idea of private ownership and accumulation of wealth. Capitalism values profit over social welfare, which often leads to exploitation of workers and resources. This can result in enormous wealth disparities between different social groups. Jenkins also examines the impact of neoliberalism on the economy and society. He argues that the neoliberal ideology, which emphasizes free markets and minimal government intervention, has led to policies that further privilege the wealthy and harm the working class. For example, neoliberal policies have led to the erosion of labor protections, the privatization of public services, and the concentration of wealth among a small number of individuals and corporations. Overall, Jenkins argues that the financial sector and capitalism are major drivers of economic inequality in the United States. To address inequality, he suggests the need for significant changes in the economic and political system, such as reining in the power of the financial sector, increasing worker protections, and pursuing more redistributive policies. The third main point of The Bonds of Inequality is that race and racism are central to understanding economic inequality in the United States. Jenkins argues that racial inequality is not a byproduct of economic inequality, but rather is deeply intertwined with economic structures and processes. Jenkins shows how the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws has led to persistent racial disparities in income, wealth, and access to education and housing. Even after the civil rights movement, discriminatory policies and practices have continued to exclude people of color from wealth-generating opportunities, while allowing white Americans to accumulate wealth. Furthermore, Jenkins highlights how racial discrimination and bias are embedded in the economy and financial systems. For example, he shows how racial biases can affect credit scores, leading to lower credit scores and higher interest rates for people of color. He also examines the role of racial bias in hiring practices and workplace discrimination, which can limit opportunities for people of color and lead to lower wages. Jenkins argues that addressing economic inequality requires addressing racial inequality, and vice versa. To achieve this, he suggests policies that explicitly address racial disparities, such as affirmative action and reparations, as well as policies that address economic inequality more broadly, such as a progressive tax system and a living wage. Overall, Jenkins emphasizes that race and racism are fundamental to understanding economic inequality in the United States. To create a more equitable society, he suggests a multifaceted approach that addresses both racial and economic disparities. The fourth main point of The Bonds of Inequality is that social movements have played a critical role in addressing economic and racial inequality in the United States. Jenkins argues that social movements, particularly those led by marginalized groups, have been instrumental in pushing for policy changes and shifting public attitudes towards economic and racial justice. Jenkins shows how social movements, such as the civil rights movement and the labor movement, have successfully challenged discriminatory policies and practices, and have pushed for policies that promote economic and social justice. For example, the civil rights movement led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination on the basis of race, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which aimed to ensure access to voting for all Americans. Furthermore, Jenkins argues that social movements have also played a role in shaping public attitudes towards inequality. For example, the Occupy Wall Street movement brought attention to the issue of income inequality and helped to shift public discourse towards issues of economic justice. Jenkins suggests that social movements are important for addressing economic and racial inequality because they provide a platform for marginalized groups to voice their concerns and demand change. Additionally, social movements can challenge the dominant narratives and power structures that perpetuate inequality, and can create a sense of solidarity among diverse groups of people. Overall, Jenkins emphasizes the importance of social movements in addressing economic and racial inequality. He suggests that social movements can play a critical role in shaping policy and public opinion, and can provide a powerful platform for marginalized groups to demand justice and equality. The fifth main point of The Bonds of Inequality is that to address economic and racial inequality in the United States, we need to rethink our understanding of individual success and meritocracy. Jenkins argues that the idea of meritocracy, where success is based on individual effort and talent, is deeply flawed and reinforces inequality. Jenkins shows how the myth of meritocracy ignores the structural and systemic barriers that prevent many people, particularly people of color and those from low-income backgrounds, from achieving success. These barriers include unequal access to education, discriminatory hiring practices, and systemic racism. Furthermore, Jenkins argues that the idea of meritocracy is often used to justify inequality and to blame those who are struggling for their own misfortunes. He suggests that this narrative ignores the ways in which systemic inequality affects individuals and communities, and perpetuates the idea that success is only achievable through individual effort. Jenkins suggests that to address inequality, we need to move beyond the idea of meritocracy and focus on creating a more equitable society. This means recognizing the role that structural and systemic barriers play in perpetuating inequality, and working to dismantle these barriers. Additionally, Jenkins suggests that we need to rethink our understanding of success and focus on creating a society where everyone has access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. This means investing in education, healthcare, affordable housing, and other public goods that can help to create a more equal society. Overall, Jenkins argues that the idea of meritocracy is deeply flawed and perpetuates inequality. To address economic and racial inequality, we need to recognize the role that systemic barriers play in perpetuating inequality, and work to create a more equitable society where everyone has access to the resources they need to succeed. Thank you for your interest in this book. Please leave your feedback on these thoughts in the comments below, or just put a like on this video. It will help me stay motivated and make more videos like this. In the description of this video, you may find links where you can purchase this book.